Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crossroads with Cam, the show about life and the journey of faith. Today we got a special guest, a family man, a father, a husband, and a candidate for Florida State House of Representatives. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, Richard, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, man. How are you?
Couldn't be better right now. It's awesome to have you on. I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot going on with the campaign. So we just wanted to have you on, talk a little bit about that, and also we'll explore different areas of it, like your family and faith and all the reasons why you do what you do. But just to start off, like for the people that don't know you, what are you running for, and how'd you get into this position?
Sure. I'm running for what's called the State House of Representatives District 72. So there are 120 districts in the state of Florida. If you imagine, if you think of the federal government, there's House of Representatives, there's senators. Each state gets a allotment of representatives. Same thing at the state level. The state's cut up into various districts. They have representatives. There's state senators, and District 72 is basically East Manatee County,
Okay.
east of I-75. There's a little bit that goes west of 75 to the water between State Road 70 and University. What got me into it, honest to goodness, was there's a guy who was in the state house and he gave me a call one day, asked to meet up with me, and we talked about it for another district. But ultimately, he's since moved on and let me know that, and we got to talking about it, see if it would be a good time for me to get into the game. Politics has always been kind of in my mind as we talk a little bit more about faith. And when I was in college, I'll tell you about how I got the calling to run and to run for office clean. I was not guaranteed that I would win. I was not guaranteed I'd be promoted,
Hmm.
but I had this calling to run and run clean. So now's the time. Now is the time.
That's awesome, and it's a big year, I'm sure, for you with like the campaign and stuff. How has that side of it been? Because for the people that don't really know that side of running for something, I'm sure it gets super hectic with everything you have to do.
Yeah, it comes at you fast. This is a unique situation. And there are a lot of different unique situations. You may have a situation where a representative resigns
Yeah.
or a representative gets appointed to a judicial office. So the seat's just automatically, out of nowhere, it's vacant.
Mm.
Usually in those situations, you either have a special election or an appointment. Here, in this unique situation, we had an incumbent, somebody who had one more term left on their 4 terms in the state house, just decide very late after the session was done this year that he wasn't going to seek reelection.
Wow.
And so the primary is August 20th. He, all intents and terms, just resigned his seat in April.
Wow.
So you have a little bit of half of April, May, June, and July for a very short primary. So, you know, when I decided to jump in, and really right before that, when I was talking about jumping in with him, the issue was other people had gotten in the race,
Mm.
and there was talk of more people getting in the race. So I sat back and I waited. So I actually gave up a couple weeks of an opportunity to get out there and campaign and finance and raise money and things of that nature to see who would get into this race. And when I kind of had an understanding of what was going to happen, that's when I jumped in. And you're talking about having to hire people. You're talking about having to talk to your friends and family and shake the trees. You're
Yeah.
talking about having to get the word out there. And the other thing that no one knew, there's no way to know this from my point of view, is that you have people who watch this stuff very closely and act really fast. So I actually got into the race, and before my name showed up online at the Division of Elections website, I got a phone call from a group, the Lakewood Ranch Republican Club. They were holding a forum the very next week, and they wanted to know if I would show up.
Wow.
So, this stuff is coming at you fast. You got to be able to adapt well. And, you got to be able to put on your different hats. I'm a dad. I'm a father. I'm a lawyer. I'm a husband. I'm also now a campaign candidate. So you got to be able to juggle these things and not let it get overwhelming.
Yeah. And so you just said like a few of the things that I wanted to talk about because I was on your website and I saw a quote that you said. It says, "As your representative, I will fight for our values of limited government, personal liberty, respect for law enforcement, and will never waver in being pro-life and pro-family. So can you talk about a little bit about that and where those values kind of come from with what you're running for, essentially?
Sure. So, some of those things, a lot of those things center around family and the type of upbringing that I had. I'm from Kentucky, born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. For those of you all who are listening and maybe watched a little bit of golf, the PGA Championship was just in Valhalla. I grew up basically off the back of the 16th tee
Oh, wow.
at Valhalla. So I was very close to there if you want to orient yourself. But, so it was a rural area. We didn't have a lot, but I had a mom and dad in the home. They were very oriented on the family. We did a lot of things together. And that kind of shaped my mind as a kid. My dad was a police officer. So you saw, that I support law enforcement. Well, law enforcement is what I knew growing up. These are the guys that my dad hung out with, that I hung out with, that we did trips and things together. So the work that they did was very instrumental in me. And as I grew up, a bunch of my friends became law enforcement officers. So the support for law enforcement, those family values, that's the experience that I had. The other things that you probably are thinking, that's a typical conservative, right? Every Republican says limited government, pro-family, law enforcement. And that's true. I mean, let's be honest, that is what you'd expect to see.
Right.
But for me, I came to those conclusions not because my mom and dad said so. My mother, if you can believe this, is more of a moderate or even maybe potentially liberal Republican. My dad was a very conservative Democrat. My family life politically didn't make any sense. So I came to these conclusions and these ideals through college, through education, watching the world, seeing an issue, looking at the issue, asking questions. And then I found that I started to apply the same principle, the same philosophy, if you will, to each issue. It just so happened that with faith and family background, that those things ended up being very conservative by nature. So when I say limited government, I'm not saying limited government because that's what conservatives and Republicans like to hear.
Yeah.
It's because I looked at history, I looked at issues, and I think that the government is by its nature inefficient. And the government, therefore, should only be in charge of certain things. And I can say that for every conservative issue, but that's how I grew up and ultimately into adulthood came to all these conclusions.
That's great. And I like what you said about how you came to your own conclusions, because I think a lot of today people see something and are so quick to just believe what they see on like TV or on social media, especially my generation, because I'm young, I'm 21. So what would you kind of say to the young voters like me that don't know everything that goes on and especially see a lot of stuff that might not always be true with the media?
Well, the first thing is be careful of the echo chamber. I don't watch Fox News, not because I hate Fox News, not because I hate the people on Fox News or anything like that. I don't watch CNN. I don't watch MSNBC because those are they're telling the audience what they want to hear. Right. You're going to see the things that work for that agency. So be very careful about the echo chamber. I think that, as someone who is in social media and someone who has a podcast and you probably share it on Facebook and Instagram and all those types of things. Yeah. You've seen the documentaries that these platforms are curtailed, the things that you like, the things that you click on, they're going to show you more of that. Yeah. So I can't stress enough, be careful of the echo chamber that you're in. You should be constantly questioning people who give you conclusions without giving you a lot of assertions. And I think it's very good in faith. One of the things that changed my faith dramatically over the past couple of years is just a one line I heard on TikTok, I think a few years ago, where someone said we should let the authors of each biblical book speak for themselves. We shouldn't be forcing them to speak univocally. That caused me to question things and to ask questions, not to change Christianity or change what I believe in ultimately, but to understand and learn more about something. And that allows you to take in other perspectives and other ideas. So be very careful at an echo chamber. And the next thing is, by and large, you're going to learn just about everything these days online. I mean, you're going to get your phone out, you're going to Google it. That's what's going to happen. But be wary of sites, be wary of links, be wary of articles and things of that nature that you probably can't find, anything else from that place but that one thing that you're looking at.
Mm.
I see a lot of people share things and they send me things and they ask me questions. Oh, I just saw this and I have never heard of that person, that link, or anything. And I'm probably going to discount it.
Yeah.
So it takes effort, it takes some time, it takes some, intellect to understand that if you think a conclusion, something just sounds good immediately, but you have no assertion to back up that conclusion, that's going to be suspect. Now, it's easy for me. As a lawyer, I live in a world of horribles. I question everything all the time. But to the average person, especially those who are scrolling through social media, just know if you're starting to see the same thing over and over and over and over again, and it seems rather simplistic, you're probably fallen into a trap, and you should try to get out of that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I like the questioning part because I think it's good to question things ourselves instead of just rely on what everyone's saying or go with like the status quo kind of thing. And especially like you mentioned with Christianity and your faith, it started with something on social media and stuff like a line basically. So a little bit back to your faith, like where did that come from, and does that help you or steer you with your values in a way?
So I've seen myself as the older brother in the prodigal son story, the one who didn't leave.
Mm,
He's always been on dad's ranch. I didn't have a crazy time in my life. I didn't go astray the way that people often talk about. I've
right.
had obviously my issues, my sins and things of that nature that I deal with, but I didn't have the party life, if you will. So I was always close spiritually, especially in the world of Christianity, such that when I was a sophomore in high school, I decided to go ahead and dive headlong into the life of a Christian. But as 21 years old, you've probably seen there's an emotional toll that Christianity takes on you in your teenage years. Where you're maybe really hot and maybe really cold, and
Right. Yeah.
you're learning some things, and then you start to question some things, or maybe some things make more sense than others at various times. And as you get into your 20s and your 30s, you start to kind of level out and life hits you. So now maybe you got married, maybe you have kids, maybe you have a job, and the other things that weren't there competing with your faith all of a sudden start competing with that time.
Mm,
And so for me, I've always been more, you know, less, let's say, emotional or spiritual, if you will, and more intellectual in that I like to talk about the actual text of the Bible. What is the context, the text, the context, all that type of thing. I love that stuff. I loved apologetics and things.
mm,
But I started seeing my family and myself starting to go with the flow. You started to hear the same things on Sunday mornings, the same things are said in the Bible studies, and you start having that low level, that low energy in your faith. When I came across somebody who wasn't, in my opinion, trying to deconstruct or whatever
yeah.
those major things that are going on, he just was pointing out that you have 66 books, many different authors. They're trying to tell us something. And it pointed me down a path to follow. You know what? What is going on
Mm,
biblically? What is the point of view of an 8th century BC author who's writing down Deuteronomy? What
right.
is going on in history when you have the Israelites in captivity? What was going on when Jesus was walking around the Galilee? You start to unpack some of those things. And to me, it just really shows you the beauty of the story that is from Genesis through Revelation. And it allowed me to say, you know what? I'm not going to try to impose a fundamentalist view of the Bible and say that because we're looking at it at this point in time, we know
Yeah.
what God really trying to say. No, I'm going to try to discover what is Matthew trying to tell us when he's writing about Judas. What is Mark trying to tell us when he's given that short piece of the resurrection story? What is Paul truly concerned about when he's writing about marriage in Corinthians? These are things that I had not heard before. You don't really get taught on Sunday mornings, but I possess the ability now to go and learn those things myself. And that's what's reinvigorated my faith to start looking at things and talking to other people, whether it be social media or out in the world. There's a different message that I can give to these people about hope and things. And that's what's really lit a fire for me of the past couple of years in my faith.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't. That's actually really good. I haven't thought about it that way of like the individual authors in a way. So that's cool that you mentioned that. And I think something that's hard for people nowadays is to talk about politics and their faith. It's like there's these two things are like so there's so much tension and people are
Hmm.
hesitant to talk about them. So what makes you kind of more bold in a way to be able to talk about these things and not fear what everyone thinks?
You know, I don't know how to talk to someone who maybe isn't in this world with me or shares my type of personality. But what I try to convey, like, my wife or someone who maybe when they talk about their faith and someone dismisses it or someone challenges it or someone, has a negative reaction, you know, a lot of Christians get upset, they get mad. And I don't know what that is in terms of maybe it's their upbringing, maybe it's just feeling insecure. There's a lot of things that it could be, and I don't know what it is. But for me, one of the talents that I have is talking to people and trying to understand why they think what they think and to have them unpack what they think right there face to face and then also meet them at their level.
Mm.
And so I've always had an ability to connect with people on their level, whatever that may be. And we can still discuss what I think and what I believe, but have that conversation, not get into an argument. I've had my fair share of arguments, don't get me wrong. But really my bend, and the same thing in politics, is to understand what people are trying to say and why they believe that. That's a huge thing. It's allowed me to make major headways in my profession. And I hope that I get to do that as well in Tallahassee.
Yeah. Yeah, and so with politics in the same like regard of that openness to be able to talk about things, for some reason today it's so like split in half with a lot of beliefs, so people are hesitant to even have the conversations because they're feeling like they're being judged already if they say one
Mhm.
thing. Like I've definitely felt that with like the other side. So what do you think people that are not super into the local politics how should they go about getting into it and not being afraid of that and speaking up and voting?
So first of all, the voting piece, starting early, starting young, helps you to develop a sense of importance with voting later on.
Mm,
If you miss it when you're 18 or you miss it when you're 20 years old or so on and so forth, that those younger years, it makes it a lot easier just to think your vote doesn't matter later on. Okay.
yeah.
So the first thing is I always encourage people when you get that first chance to vote, go to the poll, get the full experience, turn in your ID, get into the booth and all of that fun stuff, and do it again because then you will understand that, yeah, it may be one vote, but it is nonetheless important. So the first thing is, even if you don't know, go ahead and get out there and vote. I think that it's interesting you talked about local politics. It is a hard thing for any individual to look locally, especially at your age, in the teens and early 20s, to say, what does any of this have to do with me?
Mm,
You know, what the county commission is talking about in terms of, development this here and a road over there. I mean, they're going to do it anyway, right? Like, what is it? What is it? I'm going to be around just for the results
yeah.
of what's going on there. But that is how systems get made.
Mm,
That is how procedures that are just typical end up happening, is people just assuming, well, it's going to happen anyway, and
yeah.
so it doesn't really impact me all that much. But the more that you engage and listen, you may end up seeing, 5, 10 years down the road, they're going to build the Fort Hamer Bridge, and it's only 2 lanes, and I'm going to have kids in 5, 10 years, and there's going to be more people here. We should probably think about making that bridge and that road a little bit larger. When you start looking at what is going to impact you in a decade, you can see how the local politics that are happening now are going to be your reality at that point in time. So absolutely, you should be paying attention. And also like the school boards,
Mm,
those types of things. For those of you who are in high school, going into college, or in high school right now, you may not be able to vote and change those things, but you can certainly talk to your parents.
right.
This is what's actually happening in school. We adults, we think we remember, but let's be real. I mean, things change
Yeah,
quickly,
it's true. Yeah.
generation to generation. So we should be told by the people who are actually there, this is what's actually happening in school. So again, it's get involved by listening and then speaking up on certain things. But don't assume that just because you're not working yet or you're not having a family yet, that it doesn't matter to you. It's going to be your reality in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. And yeah, so with the local, I think it's important. Almost, it could even be more important locally than the government, because sometimes we, in my generation, we just see like the main headlines of
Mhm.
president, big laws. But I think in a way, local politics can really influence what's around you more, like in certain ways.
Absolutely. The local politics, depending on where you are, if you're in a rural East Manatee County, right? What goes on in Bradenton doesn't matter to you, probably.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the county level. What's the county commission doing? Absolutely, that's going to have an impact on the worker, the farm owner, the business owner, whatever, what have you. Immediately, those
Mm,
people are going to know what's going to be happening to them and the changes that are coming. Absolutely. The high schooler, probably not going to notice the immediate change all that much,
hmm
right? But again, it's is that going to be the standard in a few years? What I've been talking about in my campaign is that I've got three kids.
mm,
I got a 10-year-old, one that's about to be 7, and a 10-month-old. I'm thinking about, yeah, I want them to have a great childhood, but I also love being here, and I want them to be able to come back and get a job here
mm,
and start their own family, right? I don't want them to have to go to some other market just to make a living. So, what's happening here at the commission level, what's happening at the state level, starting now, is going to be what they're going to be dealing with, which is why I want to make sure that we are genuinely considering what we're doing now so that they're not left with the bad result later on. And quite honestly, I'm a conservative. Most, I think, Christians in this area are going to be falling on the conservative side. The thing that I find we need to be careful with is the same old formula.
mm.
We had a standard William F. Buckley conservatism and Ronald Reagan conservatism, and that served us well in the 90s. And we just kind of kept on pushing for. COVID happened, everybody.
Yeah.
The world changed. Nothing, I don't think anything is the same. My industry is not the same. Farming is different. And now we're seeing a population boom. I believe you grew up here. What was before 2020 isn't now.
Yeah.
It's all different. And we have to adjust and adapt to that difference. And although we can apply our conservative principles, we can't just repackage up the same person, the same type of people, send them to Tallahassee, put them on the commission, and expect that things are going to end up being well for us down the road when the changes get beyond us. That's probably the biggest reason why I jumped in the race.
So yeah. So speaking of that, what do you really want to change, and like, what is the passion behind you getting into office?
So, I'm an environmental litigator. What that means is I go to court a lot. We're in lawsuits a lot.
Okay.
And the environmental side, don't think, Aaron Brockovich or whatever the name of that movie is. This has to do more with permitting, development, water issues, access to water,
Mm,
stuff like that. So it usually involves somebody or some business or some landowner wanting to do something and the impacts and the rules and regulations surrounding that. So maybe you have a neighbor
mm,
who doesn't want you to have a dock, or maybe you have a group of people who are concerned about that development going in over there and the impacts on the ecosystem. So I'm involved with that daily, and
okay.
then a big component of that is agriculture. Okay, farming. Well, people in this area may not realize, but District 72, I would venture a guess, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 75, maybe 80% agricultural
Mm,
land, okay, farmland. And I think one of the biggest concerns we've seen is not that anyone's anti development, that we don't need more homes. It just seems like there's a new uh, development, a new subdivision going up like the next Publix.
yeah.
It's just runaway rampant residential development with no check whatsoever on it. Well, my concern has been in the work that I've been doing with farmers around the state of Florida and in Manatee County is that we're making a system, again, people not paying attention, just letting things go because it doesn't seem to bother them all that much. We're creating a system where farmers don't have much of a choice. They're going to have to sell out because farming is becoming unprofitable
Mm,
because of what government is doing.
yeah.
And what I believe from what I've seen is, look, again, you're a farmer, you want to sell your farm, that's fine. But if you're a farmer who wants to continue to farm, you have a right to do so.
Yeah.
And we should be balancing those efforts. And that component is in Tallahassee.
Okay.
How we protect farmers' right to farm and their ability to make a profit, the infrastructure they need to continue farming, the ability to get the affordable labor and not have to resort to, very expensive machinery and things like that. That's Tallahassee. And so I think that, I mingle with those agencies. I mingle with those people on a daily basis. To become a legislator and to have impacts there for our constituency is not it's not a hard transition.
Yeah. You mentioned like how there's so many developments now, and something I've been seeing is so many apartment complexes just coming up, even more than there's people able to afford them. So like, how do you think that plays into the farmer aspect too, taking all the land like essentially and building over a bunch of the places where there would have been farms and stuff like that?
Sure. So, development is all things, right? We're talking, if you put in 3 or 4 residential neighborhoods with homes, single family homes, you're naturally going to have some commercial components go into it. You're going to see a Publix.
Yeah.
You see a Walmart. You're going to see Costco's. You're going to see the restaurants showing up next. Well, when you have the commercial component happen, you need people to work there, right? Because the residential developments, those people are probably working in downtown Bradenton, Sarasota, going like I do to St. Pete.
Yeah.
So when the commercial follows, you need a workforce to follow with them. Well, are they going to drive in from the city? Are they going to drive, 45 minutes to go work at the Olive Garden? Maybe, maybe not. So then you're going to start seeing the rentals show up. You're going to see the apartment complexes going in. And you may think, well, Richard, these apartment complexes are pretty expensive. That's a symptom of demand. We have a lot of people showing up in the area. And right now, maybe not in a few years, but right now you can get away with those luxury apartments. And so again, this is the question, this is the concern that people are having in the area, that it seems like we're just developing to develop because right now it's lucrative.
Yeah.
But what happens when everyone who's here now and everyone's happy to be here and you're looking to get a job and you want to go, spend that paycheck at Publix, get you some groceries, and you're wondering, why are my oranges $6 a pound? Well, because they're no longer coming from the ranch 20 miles away. Okay. They're being shipped in from Chile. They're being shipped in from someplace else because all those farms are gone, right? So all of these things are tied together in some way. There's a progression to how these things happen. And we need people, the commission level, the city level, the state level, working together to understand we may need this component, but we shouldn't be choosing this and sacrificing everything else. We've got to have a balance.
Yeah, everything's about balance. And I think with the oranges thing, a lot of things now are not local. Like shop local is something that people say to keep, everything moving locally for your community. So what happens and what do you think happens if it keeps going down that path and everything starts to become shipped in and less local and more commercial? Things like that.
So you're talking about Orlando's, you're talking about the Miamis, you're talking about, even the Jacksonvilles, where the metro or the urban area basically starts to feed on itself. There's so much happening in that area, and it's such an expensive place to live that you need more money filtered in to make it worthwhile. Well, the thing is, Camden, we've got cultures in Florida. You may have a kind of a monogamous type or a hetero type culture in like a Kansas or Kentucky, for example. Kentucky's pretty much all the same except for Louisville. Very different, right? But in Florida, it's a bunch of different cultures all thrown into one state, right? I think we all agree the Panhandle is not the same place as Southeast Florida or Southwest Florida.
Right. Yeah.
And so what I've noticed is that we seem to be thinking to ourselves, we can, set a standard on high at the state level, and that may be really nice for Miami, but that's not so good for Manatee County, right? It may seem really, really good for an urban development or to require these types of restrictions or require these things in the building code or whatever for places that are built out like a Jacksonville. But that may not work well for South Sarasota County,
Mm.
you know. And I think that we see a lot of these changes coming to our cultures in our small cities, in our counties, in our rural areas that probably are not going to, they're not welcome right now, but they're going to end up having a very different look in a generation.
Mm.
And I think that's what you see that we go back to the issues of the polarizing. There's so much difference between people, and they have such really hardline positions because they like the way things are here.
Yeah.
And if they change here, fine. Someone came in, we change them. Great. But if they're being forced to change from somewhere over there, people are not happy with that.
Mm-hmm. So let's pivot a little bit. You talked about your family, and I think that clearly it has a big impact on what you believe in. You're a family man. You have 3 kids, right?
I have 3 kids.
Three
Yes.
kids, and you're married. So how does your family affect your views on going into the politics? Because you're seeing that you're raising kids, so you're looking at the next generation, and you want to make sure everything's as best as possible for your kids when they get older, like you talked about a little bit earlier.
I have a bit of a philosophy, and this is one of those things where if I could prove it, if I could take the time to sit down and prove it, I would. And the thing is, if you look at, and this area is a great example, Sarasota is a great example. You look at the demographic, right? You see a lot of wealthy, successful people, right? Maybe they started a business someplace else and came down here. Maybe they started a business here. But you are looking at people primarily in their late 40s all the way into their 60s, doing very well. What I see is these people were able to figure out that system and make it work for them, and good for them. I have no issue with that at all. But then you have people who are following them. You're talking about the 30s into the early 40s. Maybe the system doesn't work for them the same way it worked for the prior generation. They have to adapt. Mm-hmm. If you think of, someone made a really nice living off of newspapers. They're not making a living off newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
Now you have people who are probably making a ton of money off of digital things like Google Meet and Zooms and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Very different. You have to adapt in yourself, in your career as time goes on, and then you find success, and then you're kind of living off the dream. Well, what I'm seeing, what really concerns me for my kids is I'm already looking at, man, AI is here
Yeah.
now, and it's going to continue to build on itself. It's going to continue to get better as it improves itself. What does that mean for my son, who is a little bit more into the arts, likes making movies and things? Way he makes a movie in 2040 or whenever he's an adult is not how they do it now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's thinking about what's going to change and what's on the next horizon. I know that we need to address issues that are important right now, and we're going to take a look at those. But when we take action, we need to be thinking about the consequences down the road, the effect down the road. I want to give you a great example. Okay. I came out of law school in 2010. All right. So 14 years ago. At that time, the market, the country was at the bottom economically. They were trying to figure out a way to, and you may have heard when you were in school, the recovery, a slow recovery. They were concerned about recessions. This was everyday talk. Okay. One of the things that happened in an attempt to protect people from the bad things that got us into that mess in 2011, you already had the collapse. Everyone already lost their jobs. Foreclosures had already been rampant. There's all new law firms just doing nothing but foreclosures. The effects of the collapse had already happened. Then comes Congress, and they institute a thing called the Dodd-Frank bill. Okay. The whole point of that bill was to protect people from the bad thing that had already happened. What was the result of that bill? Did it sound good? Yes. Should we have had those people that lost everything in the way that they did in 2007 and 2008 and 2009? No. Was it a horrible thing that could have been prevented? Yes. So we passed a law now. Well, what's the result? The result was more job losses, more banks closing, because they couldn't meet the requirements of this law that was an after the fact fix.
Wow.
When we look at taking action on certain things to try and take care of this problem, we need to not be focused on the rear view mirror.
Yeah.
We need to be looking out ahead of us as to where we're going, right? And that is my heart, my passion for my kids, is that I want them to be able to grow up and be like, you know what, it's still a wonderful place to be here. And I am concerned from what I've seen, when I was your age, 13, 14 years ago, the place to live, if you wanted to make money, was, San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, California. You could easily graduate and just go take your, knapsack and go pop into New York City. It is a wonderful place to be. And all those people are leaving. They're not going there anymore. They're going someplace else because of what happened when everyone was riding high.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to see that here in Florida.
Yeah, I think that philosophy of like looking at the not in the rearview mirror can go into life itself, and a lot of things with politics too. Is just we do need to focus on what's going on ahead of us instead of behind us. So that's really good. And last few questions, because it's almost time to go. Where does your faith take you now that you're in all this? How do you keep up with your relationship with Jesus as a Christian while you're in politics and in everything that you do now?
I hope that people who come to the faith, come to know Christ, I hope that everything they do is done through a lens of Jesus over your shoulder. Okay. Now, you can't just listen to what your pastor tells you about Jesus. You need to be reading the text.
Yep.
You need to be praying. I love the shirt that you have on there. Pray. You need to be connected, as Pastor Bernard always says, connected to the source. Yeah. And you have to, again, this goes back to, the renaissance that I've had in terms of my own faith, is what does the author say about Jesus and why are they saying this piece? It's learning and being connected to our source. And then at everything that you do, he's standing right here behind you. Okay. When you ask, well, how do I stay connected? I think about Christ and the Gospels and the letters and the text. I think about the Old Testament more now than ever before. Probably my favorite book right now is Genesis. I think about those things all day, all the time. Everything I think about, everything that I do, there is some sort of lens or some connection back to the text. One of the things that got me excited when I learned, your podcast was about your faith and your faith walk. As I think to myself, I wonder what Camden thinks if I were to ask him, what do you think about Judas? When you hear the name Judas, what do you think about? And let me ask you that. What do you think about?
I think about just the time when Jesus was around and when he was teaching them and what he betrayed Jesus. So.
Right. And that's what you always hear. That's probably what you even read.
And there's a lot more to it, than I know too as a Christian.
Yeah. And so, but again, if someone were to mention that in passing, or if you were to talk to somebody about Judas and they were to say something along the lines of, I'd rather be a John than a Judas, or I hope that someday that my life ends up being like this and not like Judas. And because we have this perception of Judas in the story. But if I'm thinking about that same story with Jesus behind me, I start to wonder if Judas's story is less about betrayal and more about a loss of hope.
You get a perspective when you think about it.
Right. When you read Matthew, and I challenge you to go back and read it, there's a part in there when Jesus is finally turned over to the Romans. All of a sudden, Judas's mind opens and he has this immediate remorse. And he does something extraordinarily zealous in that he enters the temple. He does all of it, and then he runs off, and he does ultimately lose all hope when he takes his own life. But immediately following that, later on, when Jesus actually does come back, he goes to Peter and he redeems Peter from the most ultimate betrayal. I think that the author's trying to tell us something about hope, And so when I think about what's going on here, and I'm talking to a client, and the client is having the worst day, I know that my talents and what I'm able to do is try to instill hope to them. At our firm last year, unfortunately, tragically, we lost a shareholder, and they were all very devastated because it was a very sudden thing. And my thing I wanted to put to them immediately was, yes, this is a horrible thing, but I want to instill hope. So for me, everything I do at all times, all the time, I'm thinking about this stuff and this over my shoulder. Am I perfect? By no means. Do I mess up? All the time. But I've got this little savior behind me at all times, either patting me on the back, whispering in my ear, always controlling or always influencing me on how I walk this life.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's faith in action, because you're saying basically that everything you do, it revolves around that. And I think that's a huge part of the difference between certain people who just go to church and certain people who know Jesus is with them all the time. Because the Bible even says, like, pray without ceasing. And I think that's part of it, is just constantly keeping that in your mind, that everything, like life, is that. It's not just a part of it. I think it's like everything. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. So last question: do you have a favorite Bible verse? Because I ask every guest this.
A favorite Bible verse, yes. And it is out of Isaiah 53. And it's in verse 10. It said, "But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief." And after that verse, it goes on to talk about how if he would render himself a guilt offering, the Lord will see it and be satisfied, and his sacrifice will justify the many. Um, People often think of Isaiah 53 verses, I think like 5 through 7, where he was pierced through for our transgressions, and by his stripes we are healed.
Yeah.
The typical thing they think of the cross, but they don't go all the way to that verse where it talks about the Lord being pleased to crush him for the sake of others. And I know that when Jesus was walking this earth and Jesus was preparing to go into Jerusalem, Jesus was about to show us what it means to walk out Isaiah 53. And he took on the sin of the world. He took on the wrath of God as he took care of sin, so that we no longer had to feel guilty.
Yep.
And I think that is the most beautiful verse in all of the Bible, that God the Father could have just let it be.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. That's not what he wanted. He was pleased. He was pleased to render a sacrifice for us so that we no longer had to feel guilty.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time and really knowledge, because we're all learning. I'm learning from you, a lot of wisdom from people like you. So thank you for coming on and talking to all of us.
Absolutely, man. I really do appreciate it.
And hey, last message. What do you want to say for the voters, for the people locally? What should your last kind of message going into the election?
Absolutely. The thing is, the primary is August 20th. That's the big race for me.
Yep.
I hope that you all that are seeing this, hearing this, you tell somebody, you mention it. If they're curious, you come look us up on social media, come to the website, voterichardgreen.com, and, get curious. And if you have a question, reach out, definitely. But by all means, please participate, vote, make your voices heard, so that we can go to Tallahassee and make some real change.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm praying for you. I'm excited for you. And good luck in your race.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it, man.
All right. Talk to you soon.